Once again, I'm Joseph Sanzo. I'm the director for the Center for the Study of Lived Religion. And today, again, we have another lecture in the series Illicit Objects, Lived Religion. And I'm very excited about this particular presentation by Dániel Takács, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Egyptology, Faculty of Asian and African Cultures at the University of Warsaw. He is a founding member of the Sign and Symbol Research Center at the University of Warsaw, researching graphic communication systems there. His other research interests include the phenomenon of liminality, which I think we'll be talking about today, in ancient Egypt, especially in connection with the goddess Hathor, as well as the symbolic aspects of tomb decoration and architecture. So the floor is yours, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Once more, thank you very much for the invitation. And I hope to introduce you a very interesting topic. I felt that Hathor and everything else that she's connected to in ancient Egypt fits well into this illicit objects lived religion for simply the reason that this title even is perfect for her. She's very much so connected to entities of, let's say, of some social debate, as you shall see throughout this lecture. And she was definitely very much so part of lived religion, as how people actually manifested religious behavior and understood it with her and through her. So with that, I would like to start the presentation. So I hope you can see my screen changing and everything's okay with that. So I would like to introduce and start this introduction with how Hathor looks like and who she is, because some viewers might not be familiar with her. This is her iconography in two forms. Basically, we see an anthropomorphic form on the right side, where she is depicted as an Egyptian woman, basically. And of course, a goddess in her own right, with horns of a cow on top of her head. In between, you have a solar disk. These two symbols basically attribute her to the solar sphere, as Hathor was the daughter of the sun god who was called Ra in ancient Egypt, but at the same time, she was a bovine goddess as well. She was able to take a form of the cow and the other animal forms as well, which I will talk about today. And that's why I put here the cow on the other side. You see her form, same with the sun disk between the horns. You see the Urios cobra coming down from the sun disk as well. That is simply a goddess as well, who actually Hathor itself could be manifesting the Urios cobra, which is also kind of like the daughter of the sun god, protecting the sun against her enemies in ancient Egypt. And around the neck of the cow, you see actually a Hathoric symbol. I'll show you that on the very next slide, actually. So belonging to Hathor's general anthropomorphic and cow iconography, which you can see that they are depicted from the traditional Egyptian side view, right? There is something else in iconography that is very characteristic of Hathor, and that is actually the front view. So the front view of Hathor's face is something special in ancient Egyptian iconography, because as perhaps you know it by yourself as well, Egyptians usually depicted things from the side, but that's of course that is simplifying the situation. That was not exactly their point. It was like more about like depicting things in their totality. But that's a different matter. That's a different lecture for a different day, let's just say. And Hathor is special because she was depicted from the front, as you can see in these two otherwise related but very different images. One of them shows Hathor's face as a temple column, actually, in one of the temples built to her in Deir el-Bahri. And the other one shows a sistrum, which is a musical instrument for Hathor's cult, showing her face also from the front. You might observe the Urios cobras as well here again, kind of connecting her and emphasizing her connection to the solar sphere. And one interesting fact is that perhaps you see these little sidelines here and the box in the middle, exactly the same here. Both of them you can find. which shows that actually the columns were gigantic sistrums because the sistrums were sacred musical instruments connected to Hathor, not only to Hathor, but Hathor as well. Ergo, when they were building these columns in front of Hathor temples, they were building gigantic sistrums for the propitiation of the goddess as well. I will talk about it as well. So the frontal view, back to the frontal view. The frontal view is interesting because it's exceptional, really exceptional in ancient Egypt, and it is very characteristic of Hathor. Why did they make this frontal view? Well, we can only guess, but I have two guesses at least, educated guesses. One of them is that if you observe, she has bovine ears, even though that the face is obviously an anthropomorphic face, but the ears are like of cows. And cows' ears look the best and are able to be depicted or can be depicted in their totality from the front, hence the frontal view. But there are other factors as well. And one of them is simply that the frontal view conveys the idea of a gaze, of a look, of the eyes, of communication. And in particular, this is connected to the solar sphere because Hathor is connected to the solar glowing itself, that is a little bit like the face and the eye of the sun, which she is connected to mythologically, actually, the eye of the sun god. And to convey this radiance, and they speak about the radiant face of Hathor, hence the frontal view as well, to kind of communicate this idea of radiance. But we can discuss this perhaps in the question section later if you're interested. It's a very interesting aspect of Hathor as well. So that is for her iconography so that you can recognize her anywhere else in the future. So Hathor's associations now, just to introduce her better. So as I said, Hathor is who is visible here in this image in the company of the king. But as might as well be the company of the sun god as well. She's very, very strongly connected to the solar sphere, to the sun god who was called Ra in ancient Egypt. And she was the daughter of Ra. And in that kind of position or role, she was able to do a lot of things. So one of the connections because of this was that royal women of the royal household, being it either the mothers, daughters, wives of the king, they were all associated with Hathor because the king himself was associated with Ra, the sun god. So they had a similar type of relationship like Hathor and Ra, the royal women, with the king itself as well. Hence, she was very prominently connected with queens and their religious, and of course, because of these political roles, because religion and politics are obviously non-separable in ancient Egypt. So apart from that, there are many other places where we find Hathor. So there's this big dynastic role of her being this very important goddess, the daughter of the sun god, and hence somehow are represented by the queens and princesses of ancient Egypt. But at the same time, she's a very, very approachable deity. Common people can go up to her and ask her requests and just turn to her in different situations. And where this aspect comes from, we don't exactly know, but maybe it's not so important for today. So she was very closely connected with love, music, childbirth, festival, drunkenness, reproduction, all sorts of fun things in life, so to speak. And through reproduction and childbirth, of course, the very fact of life itself as well. She was the patron goddess of women in all sorts of situations like pregnancy, childbirth as well. But she was a participant in love affairs as well. She was very closely connected to music, just as shown her by the sistrum, or one of her sacred implements. And this necklace, which you see on this image as well, which was also a type of musical rattle-like instrument. She's connected to festivals. There are many festivals, which I will talk about today as well. And drunkenness, which is already verging on the side of illicit, actually. So you can see why I brought her into this picture. And hopefully later you'll see why I brought her today even more. But apart from this, where does she appear else? So there are the necropolis, where Hathor is very often the patron goddess of ancient Egyptian necropolis. Not always, not everywhere, but often it happens that she is. And in other places as well, even when she is not necessarily connected to necropolis, she is definitely connected to guiding the newly deceased towards becoming the part of the society of divine ancestors. So she has kind of like a psychopimpos role, a guider of spirits towards the other side, taking care of them as well. And since necropolis are in the desert as well, I can just jump to a geographically similarly located area straight away to mining regions, which are also found, of course, much further out in the desert than necropolis themselves, which were very closely connected with the towns and villages of ancient Egypt. But definitely there's some sort of connection between the necropolis and mining regions. Although I'm not insinuating that this is how Hathor's connection with mining regions came, but I just wanted to make like a connection here to somehow connect to the mining regions, where she is also prominently featured in sanctuaries created in mining regions, saying that she is the lady, the mistress of the whole region, and certain minerals like turquoise or galena, which was used for black eye paint, and so on and so on. And here in these locations appear a very peculiar type of sanctuary called speos, which is a Greek word which means cave, which was basically a rock-cut chapel as opposed to the freestanding built temples of ancient Egypt. For Hathor, they very often made speos or speois, to quote the Greek plural of it. So these rock-cut chapels were specially dedicated to Hathor. Why? Probably because of her connection with the mining regions, and also probably because they somehow symbolize the type of womb. So Hathor as a type of mother goddess, which actually comes from, and I forgot to mention this, I'm sorry, her nurturing aspect of a cow deity in the role of the king of the mother, mother of the king. Wow, okay, I'm excited, I guess. So in the role of the mother of the king, so there is like this nurturing aspect that we can observe both in the necropolis where she takes care of the deceased, but also in the mining regions where she takes care of the miners who are supplicating her in rock-cut chapels, probably to a certain extent representing this nurturing aspect of a womb that is hidden in the depth of the earth to a certain extent, but it's a type of symbolic. Actually, she was connected to mining regions probably for other reasons as well, and that is the last point on this slide, and that is actually foreign lands. So Hathor was connected to foreign lands in the dynastic era through many different sources. We know this. The origin of it is very interesting. It is only a hypothesis. I read it in a book some time ago, but I find it very fascinating and I want to share it with you. I think you will find it also very fascinating, probably. So the idea is that back in the days before dynastic Egypt and before Egyptians were settled in the Nile Valley permanently, they were living a sedentary lifestyle. That means that they were leading cattle from the Nile Valley to the savanna surrounding ancient Egypt. Back in those days, it was not a desert, but it was like a rainy savanna. So it was possible to venture out hundreds of kilometers from the Nile Valley. And actually, this is where most of the year lived. So I should have perhaps started with that and then back to the Nile Valley in the dry season. So they were living this kind of wandering lifestyle. And to know to how to lead the cattle, when to lead them, where to lead them, so that there will be abundant amount of grass and water for the cattle, you need to know, first of all, the geographic directions and, of course, the timing. And for both of them, looking at the stars helps a lot, which the stars themselves are connected with the sky, and the Milky Way, which was connected probably at this stage. This is a hypothesis also, as I said. We cannot prove it, but it's a nice idea, to Hathor. So the sky, Milky Way, and the bovine goddess somehow was connected to navigation. And navigation was obviously connected to travel and foreign lands, and hence the connection of Hathor, very early connection of Hathor to foreign lands, already in the first dynasty. and then Second Dynasty, ancient Egyptians were making the so-called Byblos run, that was a direct sea route between the city of Byblos and the delta of ancient Egypt. And those sailors, so to speak, exported Hathor to the local Byblos leaders, who had their own goddess called Balat of Byblos, and she got assimilated with Hathor at a very, very early stage already. So there is this connection of Hathor with foreign lands, with foreigners, with navigation, perhaps mining regions also because of this, because mining regions are also far out in the desert, basically on the limits between the whatever you would call ancient Egypt and the outside territories. And necropolis are also somehow on the edge of society between the living and the dead. I think you can see that I'm heading towards a liminal direction that I will talk about. But there is one more thing that I need to talk about, Hathor, which is very prominently important for today's short lecture. So, and this is the fight between order and chaos, or as Egyptians would call it, the fight between Maat, and chaos has a lot of different names. Isefet, which I wrote here today, is just one of them. There were other names for as well, but Maat is the representation of universal order, how the stars go, that the sun comes up in the morning, that people born, live, die. So the order of everything, how it should be, as it was created by the sun god on the dawn of the world. So what is the situation with this? It is that order is constantly threatened by chaos. And this constant fight between order and chaos, of course, order prevails always, basically, is the basis of this following mytheme that I'm going to tell you about, of which Hathor is a part herself. So there is the mytheme of the eye of the sun god. And I already mentioned this before, that Hathor was connected to the sun god through being her daughter, but also being her eye. It is just a mythological name for the fact that when we look up on the sky, we see the solar disk, and the solar disk, kind of like a visible aspect of the sun god, could have been conceived as the right eye of the sun, and that was in an anthropomorphic form, Maat. But and Hathor, of course, as well. Maat as the personification of this order. Hathor could appear as the personification of the order as well, through appearing as the eye of the sun god. And she was part of, hence, a mytheme, which was elaborated in many different versions in ancient Egypt. But the basic idea is roughly this, that the eye of the sun, ergo Hathor, decides to leave her father, the sun god, for whatever reason. And that is already a problem, a conundrum. It shows you that something is not okay. So a chaotic situation threatens. She leaves her father, goes abroad, usually in a form of a ferocious lion, where she does different things in different versions. There is one version where she massacres the enemies of the sun god, who are actually the people, but the sun god decides to take mercy on the people and makes Hathor, in her ferocious aspect, drunk, and then Hathor comes back to him, to Egypt as well, and hence turns back basically chaos into order in herself by turning back from a lion to a cat, which actually you can see on this very image itself. You see these felines up here and the Urios cobra in the middle, and Hathor's face in the middle here as well, kind of representing this whole mytheme. So the returning goddess was celebrated around the New Year's time, which I will talk about as well, because the return of the goddess was kind of the return of order to this chaotic world that was created when she left her father. Okay. So kind of to bring together these very different aspects and very different functions of Hathor. So you could see that there is a type of approachability of Hathor, as in you could see, as in I talked about it, that people could approach her. There were popular festivals where people took part in different religious celebrations and rituals where they could approach Hathor. But even outside of that, they could approach Hathor with different requests in different stages of their lives, whatever there was a problem. So there is a type of approachability which is not only of Hathor, other gods were approached as well all the time, but Hathor was very, very prominently in this. She was situated in the necropoli, so she is somewhere between the society of the living and the society of the dead. She was associated with mining regions, which is on the fringes on the borders of ancient Egypt, bordering all these chaotic external foreign lands as well. So she's again in between two types of being, order and chaos, the foreigners and Egypt. And because of this, or connected to this, she was actually very much so physically as well in connection with foreign lands through navigation as well and foreign peoples as well, embodying herself in herself somehow this ability to transform all of these chaotic, disorderly things into like an orderly, of course, according to Egyptians, the Egyptian order of the world. And this was very nicely elaborated in this mytheme of the eye of the sun god, the eye of Ra, where she goes through this transformation from lion to a cat. First, of course, she transforms into a lion, and then she transforms back from a lion to a cat. But at the same time, there is this foreignness to her because she goes abroad. That's where she commits all these atrocities, all these acts of murder against the enemies of the sun god. And then she's invited back to Egypt, and through inebriation, making her drunk and actually forgetting kind of like how people look like because of drunkenness, the sun god saving the world and the people, she turns back into a cat. So she's connected to inebriation, which is a type of liminal situation again, somehow between a normal state of consciousness and something else. As we know from other religions as well, different types of intoxicants, hallucinogenic drugs and alcohol were used in communication with the divine or with the ancestors for different reasons. So for all of these different spheres, we find Hathor very, very often in these liminal situations where she's somehow negotiating between the Egyptian order and the foreignness of things, somehow transforming these different experiences into a consumable Egyptian form. To a certain extent. And when I talk about the liminality of Hathor, I would like to just mention, of course, Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner, whose initial research in anthropology kind of started the whole idea of liminality. So this in-betweenness, which is very hard to define, like situations of transitions and transformations, which are very observable in the case of Hathor. So Hathor for me throughout my PhD as well emerged very obviously as a deity very closely connected to the idea of liminality, even though that of course ancient Egyptians themselves did not have the idea of liminality as we do have it in a modern anthropological research, but we can see that the very concept itself of liminality is so strongly part of our human experience of the world that it just finds different elaborations in different cultures. So it can be very nicely studied, actually, through a lot of parallel phenomena, of course, understood in their appropriate context. Okay, so this part of the presentation was kind of like an introduction to a case study that I would like to present to you now. So the case study is some elements of festivals involving ritual drunkenness. Why drunkenness? Well, drunkenness is, as I said, obviously connected to Hathor through the pacification of process of pacification, through making her turn back from this chaotic lion, ferocious lion, into the amicable cat, who represents the ancient Egyptian order and who can hence serve the sun god, annihilating the enemies, but not everybody at the same time. So drunkenness, on the other hand, obviously fits into this lecture series because it is a type of illicit thing as well in ancient Egyptian society, even though that they obviously used it all the time. It is apt for discussion for how ancient Egyptians dealt with this kind of liminal situations to a certain extent, where they use one thing, but there are parts of it which they don't rely. So let's see the festivals involving ritual drunkenness. So what we see in front of us is a so-called banquet scene from an ancient Egyptian tomb, where we see here a lot of guests seated. They are really nicely dressed. So these are the ancient Egyptian equivalents in the New Kingdom, so around like 1400 BC, of fancy dresses with really nice garlands and flowers and incense on the head that produces like a very thick smell, and of course drinking, of which I will show you on the next image more. We see here a girl offering like a drinking vessel to one of the guests. Below them we see music and dancing. So all of these aspects are connected to Hathor. And of course, we see here tons of drinks. So all of these vases, as you can see, they are intertwined with grapes, showing that they were wine vessels probably, and all sorts of garlands with some floral decoration on top. And those would have been consumed in these festivals involving ritual drunkenness and music and dances as well. So let's see different aspects of these festivals. So what festivals I'm talking about? So there is the most obvious one called the Festival of Drunkenness, which fall very, very close to the New Year festival. Actually, the Festival of Drunkenness itself was to not just to commemorate, to rather celebrate the returning Eye of Ra, so in this case Hathor, or whichever local versions of Hathor we are talking about, because local goddesses, even not under the name of Hathor, like Mut, Sahmet, Bastet, and other local goddesses, could also take upon this role of Eye of Ra. And in that form, they could have received celebrations. For example, in the Festival of Drunkenness, which, as I said, it was very close to the New Year's festival, which fell in July in ancient Egypt, marking the inundation that yearly entered the country of Egypt, bringing life itself, water, and this fertile, silty mud that provided the opportunity for Egyptians to grow agriculturally really abundant. So this arrival of the inundation was the beginning of the ancient Egyptian New Year, somewhere around July. And of course, it was commemorated with all sorts of festivals. And one of them was the Festival of Drunkenness to propitiate the returning goddess, probably as an embodiment of the inundation itself that brought the powers of life back into ancient Egypt. And there's another festival, the beautiful Festival of the Valley. It was conducted somewhere around like May, when in Luxor, modern day Luxor, which was ancient Thebes, or in ancient Egyptian Waset, the local most important god Amun-Ra, like the sun god, visited the necropolis as the sun god visits the netherworld every single day. Based on this, they made a local festival called Beautiful Festival of the Valley, when Amun-Ra visited the tombs of the deceased nobles, and not just nobles and kings, of course, as well. And people went and celebrated next to the tombs, kind of involving their now divine ancestors in this project. And Hathor was very prominent in all three festivals, and drunkenness as well was very, very prominent. For this, I recommend this little literature here. It is a chapter from an absolutely freely available book online, Hatshepsut and Cultic Reveries in the New Kingdom, from Betsy and Brian. Excellent overview of the whole thing, with an archaeological introduction to some finds of a temple porch where festivals of drunkennesses were conducted, whereas the beautiful festival of the valley was connected more to the necropolis zone, but nevertheless, they overlap each other. So festivals involving ritual drunkenness were not exactly described in ancient Egypt. We need to piece together the evidence for them from a lot of different sources, like tomb and temple inscriptions, but also ostraka, papyri, graffito, and of course the archaeological evidence as well. So it's not that we know the program of these, but we know the most important points of them, which I will recall starting from the next slide. And please bear in mind that a lot of details of these rituals are actually not clear. It's like rather we see the bigger picture, we see probably why it was conducted, but the individual details are not so clear about it. So, inebriation, just as festivals involving ritual drunkenness should, inebriation was a very, very important part of them. But why? So, why to get ritually incredibly drunk? So, the idea was probably that through this altered state of mind, one can make contact with the divine ancestors and with divine entities like Hathor or the very important Amun-Ra, so this god of the Luxor region, the Theban region itself as well. So inebriation itself is a type of liminal situation in between normal consciousness and something else, perhaps putting the person in between worlds. In one sense, the worlds of humans and worlds of the divine, but there are other ideas as well. Probably inebriation, just as uh, the returning solar eye Hathor, in her lion form, needed to be propitiated with the use of alcohol. People were kind of symbolically recreating this even by getting drunk themselves. But at the same time, the wine that was probably laced with some type of other hallucinogenic materials, we don't exactly know how, but there are some researches in this regard as well. So the wine that was consumed on these events was somehow equated with the inundation of the Nile that came with the New Year's time to ancient Egypt, bringing these fertile powers. And these fertile powers were somehow symbolically recreated in people by drinking all this wine and getting drunk and doing all sorts of actions in consequence of this drunkenness, which we will see in the next slide. But for now, let's concentrate on this one. So these translations of the text are from Brian's already mentioned article. So one of them says, for your ka, that is like ka is one aspect of a personality. It would be a bit difficult now to explain it, but think about it as a type of aspect of your personality in ancient Egypt. So, for your ka, drink until you're drunk, make festival. This is what one of the servants, for example, here, this one, who offers drink to this gentleman sitting here, and you can see very same scene everywhere else, says. So they are urging the participants to get drunk. So this is not like casual social drinking. It is a ritual where everybody needs to get drunk. Listen to what your relative says. Do not be unfairly inactive, which is already a type of comment that there were some people who did not like this. Or this part of the ritual, just as the gentleman here puts his hand out, kind of refusing the drink, just as the lady down here puts her hand out, refusing the drink. But there are other ones who are very merrily drinking. Give me 18 jars of wine, says one of the ladies down here. To be drunk is what I continually desire. The place within me is of straw, which means I'm dry as heck inside, right? So I need a lot of drinks. But one of the servants says, drink, do not sip. Look, I will not leave you, which is a very interesting remark, probably referring to the fact that people who got so much ritually drunk, which is just drunkenness with a very fancy name, people who got ritually drunk might not have been able to control or protect themselves. So we can see again that this kind of verges on the side of acceptability by people, by society, for example, people refusing it, and some servants reminding them that you need to drink because this is the custom, and don't be worried because I'm here to protect you. So these were like organized occasions of ritual drunkenness. So let's see what else they were doing once they got drunk. One of these things that you can see here, a very interesting little depiction. Some ladies drinking here, yeah, without a problem, even urging probably each other for drinking, but this lady already had too much. These kind of depictions appear in tombs in these banquet scenes, probably a type of comment on these, and of course depicting the reality as well, but probably a type of comment to which I will come back at the end of this lecture as well. So what else they were doing? So we have some very peculiar texts talking about this. Let him drink, let him eat, let him have sexual relations. So, as you can see, perhaps on these women dancing here and this lady standing over here in very, very little clothing, there's a very big chance that on these drunkenness festivals, actually, to a type of sexual behavior was demonstrated as well. We don't know to what extent. We don't know who did it. We have very little ideas about any of the details, but with Hathor's connection to sexuality and childbirth, this is only to be expected, especially that for ancient Egyptians, and for obvious reasons, the sexual act itself was the most symbolic act of creation, of which they were actually celebrating in these very festivals where they were celebrating the return of the order of ancient Egypt through the return of the solar eye to the land of ancient Egypt, which is the return of order, right? And that is an act of creation, and the sexual act of creation is a type of symbolic parallel to this, which fits very nicely into this whole Hathoric theme. There is one gentleman who said of himself, I was conceived in the forecourt, the portal beside Geseret, which is next to the temple, Hathoric temple of Deir al-Bahri, down towards Maniset. I'm sorry, small correction. The Deir al-Bahri temple itself is not Hathoric. It is the mortuary temple of King Hatshepsut, who was a woman herself in the 18th dynasty, but it was created on the site of an earlier Hathoric cult place, so it has very, very strong Hathoric connections. And next to this, there was a forecourt where this gentleman was conceived. It's a very, very interesting fact. So from these little allusions and these little things like these images here, we can really place it together that there was some sort of sexual behavior that was not part of normal social behavior conducted on these festivals, and perhaps also violence. And this is why probably these gentleman servants a quote is important from the previous slide when he said, don't worry, just get drunk, I'll take care of you. I will not let anybody harm you, because this was probably part of these festivals as well. And then finally, where these drunkenness rituals were heading were the vision of, through probably like some drunken ecstasy or however we're going to imagine this, the vision of a goddess. So let's read the text here. The young women rejoice for you with banquet, as we see it on this picture as well. Garlands, banquet garlands. The girls with fillets, as the drunken ones drum for you in the cool of the night. So there is this music going on and drunkenness through the cool of the night. Those who are awakened bless you. So people in the morning, awakening from their drunken stupor, would receive a divine epiphany. Actually, Mut, who here is in a role of one Hathori goddess, has come as the glowing one of the beautiful face. This radiance of the face that I told you about is a very visible kind of aspect of Hathori goddesses, in order to cause her system players to be joyful, desiring drunkenness from a goblet of gold. What is this goblet of gold? When they are drunk, they will see the merit goddess by means of the vessel. So probably there was a golden vessel gleaming in the morning light as the sun comes up, representing and symbolizing the goddess who returns to ancient Egypt from the chaotic foreign lands, herself being chaotic, transformed back into an orderful form, just as people awakening from a drunken stupor would kind of transform back to an orderly form, to an orderly fashion, symbolizing the rebirth powers of the New Year's flood and, of course, the sun god's power over the world as his order ensues through his daughter's Hathor's actions. So people were seeing this returning goddess in like an image, and then they turned with a corporate request to her, requesting basically the protection of Pharaoh and by extension, the protection of the ancient Egyptian world itself as well, which happily happened with the help of the returning goddess. So this was probably the final goal and the most ecstatic final moment of these drunkenness festivals. And in the meantime, people in the tomb courtyards, from where these images would come from, would go through this experience with their deceased, but at the same time living divine ancestors in their company. They would go through these experiences, kind of lending them these powers of regeneration as well, that they would use for themselves as well, vice versa. So just to kind of summarize these festivals involving ritual drunkenness. So they had this inebriation element where people were protected while being drunken, and some of them engaged into some type of sexual conduct, violent acts also. Perhaps everything was forgiven after this because this was understood that there was a ritual context to this, culminating in a type of visual ecstasy of a goddess who returned to Egypt, bringing back order to the land of Egypt, whom the community asked to protect Pharaoh and the world of Egypt. But the big question is, was this all accepted? And this is the final part of my presentation. So as you could already see from these images where people were refusing to drink and they had to be nagged on by servants and their relatives. Come on, drink, it's a ritual, you have to take part, don't tarry, and so on as well. You see these little elements of social comment on this behavior, whether this is accepted, how is it accepted, who can accept it. And a very interesting case is quoted in Brian's article from where this little translation is from. So here we see ladies in a banquet. You can see a servant with very little clothing, by the way, pouring some drinks to a lady, telling her that to have a great festival, basically, they are putting on garlands. There's music, there's clapping, there's a noble lady sitting here at a table, also drinking. So all the elements of a drunkenness festival are essentially here. And then with the clappers and the singers who are actually, by the way, if you see this image here, this is, I cannot say whether it's golden, only from this black and white image as well, but it is probably a type of vessel that represented the goddess itself as well. So directly next to them, there's a little text saying the following. Is it Maat? So Maat is this lady, goddess, representing the order of ancient Egypt. Is it Maat, the order in her side desiring drunkenness? I go, this is a question about, is it right what we are really doing? Like, is it okay to get so drunk and engage into all sorts of different activities? So we can see, and this is from a tomb's decoration as well, we can see that all sorts of questions about these activities verging on, well, not verging, not being normal at all, but and rather being very much so questionable, and to in certain other context, very much so illicit as well to a certain extent, of course, were discussed in ancient Egypt with the help of Hathor, for example, and in different festivals, very much so lived by the participants in these festivals. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and perhaps you have some questions or you would like to discuss something. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So we have some time for questions or comments. Would anybody like to ask a question? Okay. Well, why don't I go ahead and ask a question? So, Daniel, I'm wondering for the question of whether or not this festival of drunkenness was considered acceptable, deviant, etc. It might be useful to consider cross-cultural analysis. And in fact, the last presentation that we had in this section, in this lecture series by Joseph Calabrese, focused on the Native American church's use of
Mhm.
peyote uh,
Yeah, yeah,
as a
yeah.
mechanism of actually stopping people from using other kinds of illicit substances. And
Interesting.
so there's a certain sense in which there were very, very strict regulations connected to the ritual use of uh, peyote, which may, in
Mhm.
some respects, have some parallels to what you're seeing here, that there's a certain sense in which you're allowing this kind of momentary deviation from, let's say, ideas about
Yeah,
alcohol consumption and other
yeah.
kinds of substances uh, as a mechanism of, serving like a broader kind of social function of,
Mhm.
proper engagement with substances, etc.
Mhm. Um, I lost a little bit the question part because I was
So, so,
concentrating on the
so the
details.
question is whether or not maybe this is a kind of, because we have such limited evidence for this particular practice, if it
Mhm.
might be useful to kind of bring in other cross-cultural examples of how substances that, for example, on occasion could be considered inappropriate to use on your
Mhm.
own, can then serve a very important function within the context of a ritual.
Yeah, yeah. I think it also matters how you use those substances. As in, alcohol was definitely not banned in ancient Egypt, as we know, like it was very much so consumed. The question is, of course, what did they consume on these events? Because, as I said, there is research into this that they added some certain hallucinogenic substances, perhaps blue lotus and things like this, which I'm not very much so familiar with. Um, Whether they wanted to discuss that as well and how this was seen. Well, the goal of it, the whole festival is like I could liken it a little bit to our New Year's Eve. Yeah, that's a good one. Because what happens during our New Year's Eve? Social rules are suspended. We are allowed to be very loud. We are allowed to. I remember when I was a kid, the best thing was that you could stay up late, right? You're allowed to stay up late. You don't have to adhere to normal order. You can do things like being loud, get drunk. Everybody's on the street. It's almost like carnival times as well. This kind of liminal, like in between times of normal and whatever else definitely gives you an opportunity, as in for society, for an opportunity to discuss how far you can go, perhaps, right, and what you can do and cannot do. Um, Regarding substances, we really don't know, sadly, how they would have looked upon this, but definitely you could see that there were limits to drunkenness in ancient Egypt, just as from both kind of behavior, like the people saying no in the banquets, but at the same knowing what's going to happen, right? That's the idea, that they say no because they know what's going to happen later, and some other people saying, give me 18 bottles of wine, and they're like, everybody's like, ooh, that one's going really. So you can see that there's a discussion going on about like the use of substances to an exceeding or like a really huge access, but it had a function. That's the most important thing. That perhaps was a question for Egyptians as well. Is it math? Is it really orderly what we are doing? Is it allowed? And then they say, yeah, yeah, sure, it's orderly because we are embodying somehow the transformation of Hathor into math again, so chaos into order. So they were allowed, but there are these many, many questions in society. The interesting thing is that these tomb decorations are, of course, in the tombs of higher echelons of society. So I wonder myself to what extent they would have taken part in these, for sure to a certain extent, or how was it, how would have it have been seen by, I mean, like imagine like the prime minister rolling around in the dirt, because he's so drunk. I mean, like how would have been that seen by society? So these are all the questions that probably ancient Egyptians themselves had as well, like going on. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
Uh,
Other
Thank
questions? Yes, Pierre.
yes, yes, I would like, well, thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation that is full of insights about um, about how many elements continue along history, and sometimes they condense into a kind of constellations of elements that then are kind of embodied in certain feminine deities. But I find also in the Brazilian pantheon, Afro-Brazilian pantheon, that certain feminine entities kind of have the same kind of characteristics. But I have two questions. One that are related to what you were saying in answering Joe. So one aspect is, so they are not in a ritual of initiation, right? There are not any initiation process that is related to the liminal phase, as Van Gennep defines, let's say, one of the aspects of liminality. They are kind of more, I'm thinking aloud here, right? They are kind of more a ritual of inversion. Like you were saying, rituals or New Year's Eve, like these moments where social order can be transgressed. And this does not mean that then during the year or in other moments, in other kind of situations, the same kind of transgressions are allowed.
No, yeah.
Ritual or inversion are exactly this. It is the moment when women can dress like men.
That's when you do it. Exactly. It's like yeah,
exactly. So, and I find, I mean, very fascinating the kind of sorry that my question is long, but it's also a reflection.
Sure.
This kind of the containment, the container that is given with care. What emerged from these sentences is not just a kind of an invitation, like drink, don't worry, but there is this sense of a protected setting. Is so actual in relation to what is the psychedelic discourse about what is a certain setting, right? This is the fact that an experience of altered state of consciousness is not in any situation, but is in a protected setting. My question is also related to this sense of order and chaos, because when you say this math, right? Is it math, inner sight, desiring drunkenness? For me, it was impossible not to think about Dionysus and the Dionysus and the Apollonian, right? And I found so interesting that there is this kind of question: is math allowing? Is math agreeing with this? And so for me, it is so interesting that there is this dynamic that is the order and chaos, and there is again the kind of deities that are in conflict or not with the idea of order and chaos. So the deity of drunkenness and the deity of order. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know
Very
if you
similar
get my
patterns.
question because it is kind of a raw way of reflecting, but yeah, I would like to give you space for more reflections to share with us about this because I found so fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you totally that these are patterns that we can observe in many other cultures as well. And I think they are underlined by the fact, really, of how humans see these things, like especially processes of transitions. This whole liminality, that's the charm in it, that it has a gigantic power of explanation because it's so ubiquitous, as in like these phenomena in human thinking generally. So even though that the details are different and the context can be different as well, a lot of the things can be put into parallel exactly to see both the similarities and the differences as well. So totally, they are there. I mean, and the theory of liminality helps you really to understand and explain a lot of this stuff. And as you said yourself as well, I would probably bet that any culture you take on Earth, you would be able to find parallels to this, actually, to a certain extent. So yeah, there we go. We can just go on with the research very nicely with this. It's a really good interdisciplinary and multicultural study base.
There is in ancient Egypt this idea of the Dionysus and Apollonian, or it is something that, yeah,
No,
let's
no,
say
there is.
it's another cultural and historical moment, right? But there is this duality
Mhm.
and of order and chaos as
Yes. But that's the thing
also
that you
this
see.
friction.
So for Egyptians, it worked, I think, in a way that Hathor was able to kind of embody both somehow in one single body. And that's the trick, right? Because when they say chaos, what they mean is actually these are, to put it in a Egyptian metaphorical way, is that they are talking about primeval waters. The primeval waters, which actually surround the bubble of Earth, that's how they roughly imagined it, constantly kind of threaten Earth with destruction. But these are the very same waters from where creation came from. So chaos is the source of creation and at the same time the potentially destructive forces as well themselves. And that's why one single entity kind of can even depict it. It's a little bit like the coin with the two sides, right? Two sides of the same coin.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. Any other final questions or comments? Yes, Christina.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I was wondering, I know that all the conclusions that we can draw, they are filtered through everything that we have as sources, either textual or visual,
Mhm, mhm.
archaeological. But I was wondering whether we know about any kind of temporality, so that these associations were more emphasized or abandoned throughout these several thousands of years that we can talk about, when they were more in the foreground or in the background of celebrations, for example.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
this association with Hathor
fair
and all
question.
the others, but especially this one because the presentation was about this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so the drunkenness festivals, the drunkenness ritual elements, you mean? Yeah, yeah, fair question, fair question. So most of these examples that I talked about are from the New Kingdom, right? So that's a fairly delimited like time span in ancient Egypt. Yeah, I would say, but then sorry, I need to correct myself, of course, because they kind of started before Definitely in the Middle Kingdom already the Festival of Drunkenness was there, but it goes on into the Ptolemaic times, and even beyond that. The understanding of these could change, as you kind of implied, as in, religions develop, they have different understandings of things, and even though that, as we know, that one of the things that sometimes outsiders see about ancient Egyptian religion, that it seems monolithic, but once you get down to the details, you'll see that there are a lot of changes happening there. Yeah, for sure, it evolved, and in my opinion, it's largely connected to the persona of Hathor and her evolution. So that this, for example, you remember that I mentioned this psychopompos role of Hathor conducting souls between the necropoli, so the world of the living and the world of the dead. It kind of comes out in the coffin texts in the Middle Kingdom. And that's an evolution. That's something that we probably don't have it before as well. So there are definitely different strands kind of coming together in the New Kingdom, culminating a little bit around the persona of Hathor, and then from that moment on, kind of going forward as well. And the understanding of it, yeah, could have changed. I mean, if you think about just the fact that Hathor, how popular she was, and then at the end of, let's say, okay, this is perhaps not a very correct way to say it, but I think, okay, so around the Ptolemaic times of the ancient Egyptian civilization, it is Isis who kind of takes over, right? So this all, but she takes all of these Hathoric aspects with her, actually, even though that Hathor, perhaps in this kind of manifestation, is not so popular anymore. So there is this development process, definitely. And then through Isis, they might have understood it in a different way, because they had different concerns. They were already like interacting with first Hellenistic and then Roman gods as well. So there was a different context of understanding these things as well. So definitely there's a lot of area. I was giving kind of like a blanket overview of the situation of these elements. And of course, as with every kind of generalization, there's always the danger of overgeneralizing a little bit. But I think it's a fairly good representation of ancient Egyptian thinking about liminal situations and questions about these kind of liminal situations and behaviors like drunkenness and so on and so on, and like all of these things. Yeah, I look at it a little bit more like that. So it was much less like temporalized, although I was more or less talking about New Kingdom things, more broadly about, perhaps if we can say so, like an ancient Egyptian thinking about how chaos and order relates and works together, and what's the dynamic between them. And that was kind of put on the persona of Hathor, and then her personal development kind of reflected these ideas.
Thank you. I will have more questions later on when we talk personally about this.
Okay.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you for
Thank you very much.
Very interesting. And thank you everybody else for being here, and we hope to see you on the 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.